Hawley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to both the witnesses for being here. Mr. Bertok, if I could just start with you. Some of our country's largest service firms, including Deloitte, McKinsey, I think, others, maintain a very significant presence in China, even as they are pursuing and executing contracts for the Department of Defense. Should we be concerned about that?
The upfront optics of that are obviously not very attractive at all, and so the real operative question is, what are the protections in place that we need to have in order to preserve any risk from coming out of that? In the case of some of these companies, they are actually a foreign-owned company, that they have a full, dedicated protection against foreign ownership, control, and interest. The policies are there, the procedures are there, the structure is there, the execution and implementation is what has to be monitored very, very carefully in that regard. Partnership companies like those present challenges to us across the board. I do believe that DoD has the national security procedures and processes in place and structures. It's the execution and monitoring that becomes absolutely critical in that regard. We have firewalls. We have to make sure they're clear and high. I know you wrestle with those every day internally.
Should it be a conflict of interest for a company like Deloitte, let's say, or McKinsey to do work for the Chinese government and or its proxies while also doing work for the Department of Defense?
We've looked at the legislation that's been introduced in this body on that regard, and we think there's some very serious concerns that do need to be addressed there. But we also need to make sure that America can still get the capability and competence of the workers we need as well. So it's that balancing act that comes critical there. I'm not sure if it's directly a conflict of interest. There's definitely a conflict. There's definitely interest, but there may be a better way of getting at it.
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty concerning, I would say. Let me just ask you, I mean, you're the head of the Professional Services Council. What advice would you give to companies like Deloitte that are doing business in China, including with the Chinese government and its proxies, despite the threat that that government, its proxies, and the Chinese Communist Party pose to this nation?
We're actually looking, and we're working on a white paper of what it is that those companies need to do better in order to bring the kind of comfort that you need to have out of that. But I don't have something ready to deliver to you today, but we'll be happy to take that.
Fair enough. Thank you. Ms. Lord, let me ask you about the Stingers issue, which Senator Tuberville raised a little bit ago. Obviously, Stingers are in high demand in Ukraine. They're may well be in high demand in Taiwan. We need, of course, to maintain a robust supply ourselves. You said that you think one of the problems here is we haven't kept a hot production line. What do we need to do now to accelerate production of the Stingers and other similar capabilities that we're going to need for frontline states like Ukraine and Taiwan, but that we're also going to need for ourselves all at the same time?
In order to have production, you need facilities, equipment, tooling, material, and a workforce. So what we need to do is incentivize industry to do that through long-term contracts that allow them to make those investments and a reasonable return on that investment so that they will stay in business. So long-term, clear demand signals, along with, if we really need to get this jump started, I would say some DPA Title III type investment to stand up lines, train the workforce, and get the supply chain going.
How much of it, in your opinion and in your experience, is about incentivizing industry versus overcoming hurdles within our own acquisitions bureaucracy? Can you speak to that?
Oh, I think that it's a Venn diagram that is very, well, there's a huge amount of overlap. And I think, again, we have an acquisition system that can do these things quickly. We are not incentivizing our workforce to do that. To David's point earlier, how often does this committee have a hearing calling out and trying to understand all the fantastic applications of other transaction authorities and middle tier of acquisition, what that did to speed up the acquisition process, what that did to help the user downrange? We need to communicate the art of the possible and then encourage it versus admiring the problem.
Yeah. My concern on this is to be clear where I'm coming from here. It's not just related to the Stingers. I understand we're also having production issues with the LRASMs and other advanced munitions we're going to need if we are in an environment, and I think we are, where deterrence is the name of the game, and deterrence by denial.
Absolutely.
Both in the Indo-Pacific, also going forward in Europe. We've got to be able to deter our near-peer competitors, in the case of China, frankly, our peer competitors. And in order to do that, our competitors, our enemies, frankly, our opponents, have got to believe and got to know that we have the kind of capabilities that we're going to need, and we can supply our partners and allies with the capabilities they're going to need in short order. So to me, getting this right is vital to being able to execute deterrence by denial, which we have got to do going forward.
Exactly. And one of the things that we need to consider is when you go down those various weapon systems, 3, 4, 5, 6 levels down the supply chain, you find all of a sudden the family tree doesn't branch anymore, and that you have some critical semiconductor components and so forth. So it gets back to some of these fundamentals that Senator Kelly was asking about as well. We've got to fix the fundamentals.
I've got a few more questions for each of you, which I'll submit for the record. Thanks so much for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank